What if an old psalm about a king's betrayal wasn't really about a king at all? Today, we're jumping into Augustine of Hippo's take on Psalm 7, where he pulls back this curtain to show us a hidden story about sin, salvation, and how God really works. See, Augustine looked at the historical stories in the Old Testament as way more than just history. He thought the prophet threw this veil of mysteries over the text on purpose, hiding a much bigger spiritual truth. For Augustine, the real story wasn't about a bunch of kings and traitors. It was about Christ, the soul, and salvation.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? How on earth did Augustine take this tale of political backstabbing and turn it into a universal guide for the soul's salvation? To get how he did it, we've got to look at the story on the surface first.
Okay, so the historical backdrop for Psalm 7 is straight out of the second book of Kings. And let me tell you, it is pure political drama. We're talking civil war, a son trying to overthrow his own father. The whole thing is a mess of spies and traitors.
So, here are our main players. You've got King David. He's the rightful king. Then there's his son Abessalon, who's leading a full-on rebellion against him. Absalon's got this guy Achitophel advising him. And get this, Achitophel used to be David's best friend. To fight back, David's loyal pal Chusi goes deep undercover in Absalon's camp, pretending he's switched sides to spy for David. It's some classic cloak and dagger stuff. But for Augustine, all that drama wasn't the real point. Nope. He was convinced the actual clues were hidden in what the characters' Hebrew names meant. And this is where he starts to lift that veil and decode the spiritual message. He kicks things off with the traitor, Achitophel. In Hebrew, his name can be read as brother's ruin. Now, for Augustine, that was no accident. It was a spiritual clue pointing to a much, much bigger betrayal. And this idea, this brother's ruin, wasn't just a clever phrase. For Augustine, it was a blinking neon sign pointing right at one of the most notorious figures in the entire New Testament. And that figure is Judas. So why brother's ruin? Well, think about it. Christ himself called his disciples his brethren. So the ruin of the disciple who betrayed the Lord, it's perfectly summed up in the meaning of Achitophel's name. Now what's really wild is how Augustine just keeps going with this. It's not just Achitophel who stands for Judas. The rebellious son Abessalon does too. His name means father's peace, but the guy waged war. Augustine saw this as a perfect picture of Judas, who, even though he was offered peace, had war in his heart. So both of these Old Testament figures become different sides of the same great betrayal. But the piece of the puzzle that Augustine says is the most significant is Chusi, David's loyal friend. His name means silence. And this is not just about being quiet. It stands for something way bigger. This silence is all about God's hidden plan. You know, just like Chusi worked quietly behind the scenes, Augustine saw this as a picture of how God quietly moves his will forward, even through the worst actions of people. It's like God's silent counterplay to the whole scheme of the betrayer. So here's the main idea. God, in his secret plan, this silence, let the betrayal of Judas happen. He took this act of impious wickedness. Now, he didn't create the evil himself, but he ordered it. He actually turned an act that was meant to destroy one man into the very thing that would bring about salvation for everyone. But wait, there's one more layer. The psalm calls Chusi the son of Jemini, and the name Jemini can be read as right-handed. This little detail is a huge key to getting the nature of God's secret plan. This detail ties it all up. Because Chusi is the son of the right-handed, it signals that the silence, God's hidden plan, wasn't just random. It was a planned, favorable act from God's own right hand, a sign of his goodness and might that was only shown to the faithful. But Augustine doesn't just leave this as some big, cosmic drama. No, he brings it right down to a personal level. He argues that this very same battle plan is what happens in the struggle of every single soul. The same forces that were at play in salvation's history are at play inside each of us. The writer of the psalm points to one single main enemy. After asking for deliverance from all his persecutors, he narrows it down to one, the lion. And Augustine says this lion is the devil, the adversary who's not trying to destroy the body, but to tear apart the soul itself. So how does this lion attack? Well, according to Augustine, the devil's best weapon isn't some outside force. No, it's an internal weakness that he uses against us, a vulnerability that comes from inside the soul. And that weapon is pride. Augustine is so clear about this. He says, the beginning of all sin is pride. And to be more specific, the beginning of man's pride is to depart from God. It's the original sin, the one that caused the first fall, and it's still the soul's biggest threat. Okay, so if pride is the devil's weapon of choice, what's our defense? Augustine gives us another great metaphor, the bow of Holy Scripture. The hard, strong wood of the bow, that's the Old Testament. It gets bent and made ready by the string, which is the New Testament. And from this bent bow, arrows, the divine preachings of the apostles, are shot out to strike the heart and light up souls with a heavenly love.
And this brings us to Augustine's last big idea, what justice really is. He uses this image from the Psalm of a sinner who's digging a ditch. You know, the classic picture of setting a trap for someone else to fall into.
It's a classic picture of someone with bad intentions, right? The sinner carefully digs a pit for his enemy. But Augustine wants us to stop and think, who actually ends up in that trap? And the answer from the Psalm is simple and pretty neat. The one who dug it. The sinner gets caught by his own handiwork. The very trap he planned for somebody else becomes his own downfall.
And this shows us everything about Augustine's view of divine justice. God isn't sitting up in heaven thinking up punishments for sins. Instead, he has set up creation so that sin punishes itself. The very things that brought the sinner pleasure in their wickedness become the tools of their own pain. The injustice they cooked up comes right back down on their own head.
And so Augustine leaves us with this final thought to chew on. If evil basically self-destructs, what does that tell us about what justice really is? Maybe it's not about an angry judge in the sky, but about a smart, self-correcting moral order that's built right into the fabric of creation. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.